Hey, it's Aaron from Reeducation, and I woke up this morning with basically everybody in my house unable to access their Facebook accounts. It was really weird, but I didn't think much of it because, I had shit to do, and it wasn't really my problem. I don't use Facebook. But it wasn't until later on that day that I realized that this is actually a pretty big deal. Facebook went down and their stocks are currently plummeting, or at least they were a few hours ago. And I want to talk a little bit about it because there has been a lot of discussion in the media, at least on the first few videos that I clicked to learn about this thing, that I would say is a perfect example of manufacturing consent. So the very first video that we're going to take a look at is Facebook stock is plummeting amid outrages, whistleblower report. And this is from CNBC television. So let's just jump right in.
Here to break down the headlines, Nilay Patel is editor-in-chief of The Verge and a CNBC contributor. Delano Saporu is founder of New Street Advisors and also a CNBC contributor. So is Steve Grasso, who is also here, and he is also the CEO of Grasso Global. It is great to have everybody. What a day. Let's start with some of the biggest movers. Facebook is probably the sort of main one here, down 5.5%. They've got these reported outages for everything from Facebook to Instagram to WhatsApp. They've got last week's whistleblower revealing herself to be former product manager for civic misinformation, saying the company is acting purely in self-interest. The company is still up 20% this year despite questions about its practices and social impact. So let's start with you, Steve Grasso. Is Facebook kind of the reason why the market is under so much pressure today? Is it just getting swept up in all of this? Is it just coincidental, I guess, that it's down this much? Or what do you make of, how would you relate its own problems to the problems the broader market is experiencing, if there is any relation?
Yeah, so it doesn't help, to your point, right, Kelly? And on the show, you cover the stories du jour, obviously better than anyone. And you notice that it's been about China, it's been about Chairman Powell, it's been about rising rates, it's been about the rotation out of growth into value. So this is the latest of the stories that are hitting the market. But if I look back on a chart and go back to the summer of 2020, Facebook was under a lot of pressure there as well, and that was bought. I do agree, with Jim Cramer that this time appears to be different. Having said that, I don't know how different this is going to be and when buyers will step in. But
Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk a little bit about here is how the media portrays the market itself around Facebook. The very first thing that you want to notice when it comes to how they talk about anything to do with a large company within the market, they always like to tell you about the immediate drop in the market, but then constantly follow it up with, well, but this was much worse a long time ago, and they recovered just fine from that. And look at the graph on the screen right now. It actually projects that since 2020, Facebook has actually risen in stock prices quite a bit. So even though this small dip is happening, it doesn't mean that Facebook is a toxic entity entirely. And essentially what they're trying to do is push the idea of buying the dip. Buying the dip, of course, means when a stock gets low, its sell price is low, people should then buy that stock because then they could expect to see high returns later. Now, this doesn't always work, because recessions do happen all of the time. So just buying the dip doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to see a return in the future, though you might. Usually when a stock is falling incredibly fast and it's right at the beginning of some kind of recession or the bursting of some kind of bubble, it's more likely that the people that jump in to buy that dip are going to not see returns in the long run and possibly lose an incredible amount of money. But that doesn't look good on the news. It doesn't look good for Facebook, and it doesn't look good for all of these mega conglomerate corporations that run everything to tell you that one of their major primary entities is failing. Of course, this is for many, many reasons, one major one being that a lot of the trading done in the stock market is done through algorithms. It analyzes a bunch of news stories and determines what the best bet is, and it can happen several times per second. Every single trade is happening algorithmically through robots, essentially, and if the robots see that something volatile is happening in a major corporation in the United States, it's going to set itself to sell, and then the computers will help tank the economy. That's not exactly what they want to portray in the media. They want to portray that this is an important entity, so important, in fact, that it might even be too big to fail. And we'll talk a little bit about that with the following video. But let's look a little bit more into all of this information on the stock prices.
Back then, the stock fell 20%. We're down from peak about 16% or so. Mm-hmm. Another couple of points.
Are you a buyer, Steve?
I wouldn't be a buyer just yet, but I'm just giving the viewers out there, 315 is your 200-day moving average. That gets you right in line with the sell-off that we saw in the summer/fall of 2020 if you were thinking about buying a dip in Facebook.
So that's exactly what he's doing right here. Don't worry. Back in 2020, the dip was much bigger than it is now, or at least a little bit bigger than it is now, and people made a lot of money. So even though he's hedging his bets, even though I'm not a buyer yet, I just want to let the viewers know that this isn't that big of a deal. Don't worry about it. Everything is going to be fine. While everybody in the entire hemisphere is freaking out and losing their minds because they just lost all access to Farmville. Is Farmville still on Facebook? I don't even know anymore.
So that's certainly one line to watch. Delano, are you a buyer here?
Yeah, because I think, as mentioned by Steve, there's a lot of factors at play, and I think you should be a buyer here. As mentioned, this dip is about 15 to 60% off its highs. We looked at the bad news flow. We obviously know that there's going to be some more regulatory scrutiny and some legal risk that's at play here. But I'm looking at, if you pull back the chart, as mentioned, if you're looking at this as being one of the bigger and better mega market cap performing stocks this year, as well as the platform, right? As well as the family of products still growing at about 3 billion daily average users for their family of products. And also that whole macro level event of digital advertising, digital spend, that's still a great tailwind for Facebook here. And I still think that comes to play at some point. Buyers step in. So you probably want to be careful at what entry points you enter, but you should be looking for opportunities here, Kelly.
So this guy is all about buying the dip. Buy the dip, buy the dip, buy the dip. That's what this guy is basically telling everybody to do. So they have the guy before saying, well, things are bad, but not so bad that I'm not buying yet, but, you should consider buying the dip. And then the next person they have on says buy the dip, buy the dip. So if people do buy the dip, it will increase the stock, prices or whatever it is a little bit. And that could help the company a certain amount. But basically they're completely glossing over the reasons why these things are happening. They covered it in about 10 seconds at the very beginning of the video. And the rest of the time they're just talking about how this is going to affect investors. But don't worry, regular people, everything's going to be fine by the dip. And I have to mention that this is the first video that came up when I just punched in the words Facebook. I'm doing this from, I believe, a Canadian server, so the results might change depending on your location. But this is the first video that I found, the very first one, and it's just talking about how you should not be worried and buy that dip, spend more of your money in the middle of a recession and a pandemic. But for a second before we move on, let's just talk about motivations here. We're talking about CNBC. They're the ones that put out this video clip, and they are owned by NBC Universal. NBC Universal is a large media corporation that technically might be in competition with Facebook, so their motivation isn't necessarily to make Facebook look great, but they also don't want to make Facebook as an entity look toxic, because if the market hears that a large corporation or a large entity is toxic, then they're going to sell all of their stock in that corporation or entity, and that can be bad for the economy in general, right? And something that's bad for the economy could also be bad for CNBC and NBC Universal and all of these other multinational conglomerate corporations. So that's why they're focusing more on the financial aspect of it. How should the investors feel about this sort of thing, and, soothing their minds, while not really focusing on any of the things that Facebook has done, the terrible shit that they're involved in, or how this could negatively affect the economy. You always have to make sure that the economy seems like it's doing just fine, and if it isn't, it's the other guy's fault.
Nilay, let me phrase the question this way. Is there anything that regulators could do that would hurt Facebook without helping investors? In other words, most of the time, if they pursue more regulation, it helps Facebook. They're the biggest, they can comply the best, they can outdistance everybody. If they break them up, probably helps investors. They wouldn't mind, seeing Instagram separate from WhatsApp, separate from Facebook. Can regulators do anything to punish Facebook that won't actually help its long-run financial performance?
I think there's a lot regulators want to do. I think right now we are so exhausted by endless Facebook scandals that we might not be seeing this one for the scale that it has and the impact that it has. What you have with the whistleblower is Facebook's own research, Facebook's own employees saying this company is hurting people in X, Y, and Z ways, specific ways, with teen girls and body image issues, with radicalization. That stuff is cannon fodder for regulators.
See, now they finally get into why this is happening. After 4 minutes and 4 seconds of a 5-minute, 30-second long video, they finally get into a little bit of why this is happening, and they gloss over it again by just saying, oh, well, some girls with body image issues, and your radicalization, blah, blah, blah. But then they don't actually focus on any of that. They completely leave it until the very end, and they bury the reasons why anything is happening. Most people already watched these 4 minutes of this video, and they're like, yeah, okay, I get what's going on. Holy shit, everything is going to hell. I better make sure that I buy stocks in Facebook because I'm going to make a lot of money. They're not thinking about Facebook in general and how they are damaging society. Right? Not a lot of people are talking about how this giant conglomerate corporation going down for one day ends up completely destroying the livelihood of a ton of people. Well, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. They do talk about that in the next video that we're going to watch, but the way that they frame it isn't necessarily around, oh, well, we should do something to stop this giant corporation. They look at it more of, well, don't forget that Facebook is really, really powerful, and getting rid of it or having it fall apart might destroy lives.
Whistleblower says she doesn't want Facebook to be broken up. She's obviously on the Hill tomorrow. Facebook itself says it wants regulations. I think it wants to capture the industry in that way. I think every regulator in this country has finally been handed a sheet of papers from Facebook itself that says this company is doing harm, and it knows it. And I think it's going to take a lot for Facebook to get through this in a way that doesn't result in a company being radically restructured, whether that's a breakup or whether that's a governance change, which I think a lot of people would like to see. Something is coming this time.
It seems to me, Delano, maybe the only two sources of pressure could be massive divestment on the ESG front, although, again, if you look at the financial performance of Altria, not necessarily a bad thing. But maybe you could just...
And then they just jump right back into the financial implications and so forth and so on. So, yeah, mild talk about possibly breaking up Facebook, but the whistleblower doesn't want that to happen. Remember, they made sure to mention that part. And outside of that, they just gloss over everything and talk about how it's going to affect finances. What could I have possibly expected? Now I'm going to just jump into my history here because I've seen it. We're going to watch this next video here entitled, What Caused the Facebook Outrage and How It Affected Global Users, Business. Again, about business. And this was the next video that popped up in the search results, the following video that YouTube would have automatically played after the one that we just seen. So this one is from PBS NewsHour, and let's jump in.
Facebook and its group of apps and social media channels went down for most of this day. William Brangham looks at the latest, all of it coming on the eve of another difficult congressional hearing for the social media giant.
That's right, Judy. Facebook's app and its website, along with Instagram and WhatsApp, went dark for several hours today, and at this moment they appear to be slowly coming back up. The cause of the outages still haven't been explained, but for the more than 3 billion people in the United States and abroad who use these apps to communicate and to do business, these outages were a huge disruption and a reminder of these apps' influence.
So I want to really point out what he just said there, because a lot of people are going to not even really hear that part. It's just an introduction to the next person that they're going to be featuring that's going to talk a little bit more. And he said it quite quickly, but I'm just going to jump back.
The cause of the outages still haven't been explained, but for the more than 3 billion people in the United States and abroad who use these apps to communicate and to do business, these outages were a huge disruption and a reminder of these apps' influence.
So essentially what he's saying there is, don't forget how powerful Facebook is. Facebook is so powerful that it only being out for a few minutes or for a few hours disrupted the lives of millions and millions of people. So what exactly do we do with that information as people that are listening? Do we think that, oh my goodness, Facebook is something that we need to get rid of? Maybe. Some people might think that. Probably they already had that idea inside of their heads. But more likely, people are going to hear that and say, oh my goodness, we can't let Facebook go down because I might lose my job, they might lose their job. A lot of people are advertising on Facebook. My Aunt Sally has a Facebook account that she promotes her MLM through, and if she's not able to sell undercoverware or Tupperware or whatever the fuck it is, then she's going to go out of business and she's not going to have an income. We have to save Facebook. We have to jump behind Facebook. And that's what I'm picking up from that little statement there. And it's one of those statements that are actually reiterated a few times within this interview. And it seems sus to me. It seems a lot like manufacturing consent. Again, let's look at the motivations here. PBS NewsHour is mainly funded by the American government. So you can probably be sure that they're not going to say anything that the American government really wouldn't want them to say. So somewhat unlike before, where we had a major multinational conglomerate that's in direct competition with Facebook, trying to mainly focus on the financial aspects of this, we have on PBS a little bit of a different narrative. The American government has and still does work hand in hand with Facebook. This is public record, and so Facebook, by proxy, has a certain amount of sway over what's being broadcast on PBS. I'm not saying that they are 100% in control of what happens on PBS, and yes, they are an old media outlet that still exists on the old school platforms, so there is a certain amount of competition there, but nowhere near as much that we would find in other media sources.
Shira Frankel of the New York Times reports on Facebook extensively and has been following this all day. She's the co-author of An Ugly Truth Inside Facebook's Battle for Domination. Shira, great to have you back on the NewsHour. Can you help us understand what is it that happened today?
So starting at about 9 a.m. Pacific today out here in California, Facebook and its family of apps went down. That includes Instagram, WhatsApp, Oculus. These are platforms that, as you said, impact over 3.5 billion people. And for several hours, no one, including the security engineers at Facebook, knew what was going on. This was amplified by the fact that Facebook's own internal communications were down. So it wasn't just that we couldn't access Facebook.com. Facebook engineers couldn't get into their own emails, and they couldn't even access their own buildings in many cases.
Is there any evidence, I mean, this is what we always think of when these kinds of things happen nowadays, that this was a hack of some kind?
So right there, the presenter is asking a question that a lot of people, while watching this little interview, obviously came to immediately. Well, the way that she's describing it, it sounds like it must have been a hack, right? That's exactly what I thought and what everybody else in my house was thinking when we watched this as well. But no, of course, it doesn't seem like it was a hack.
At this point in time, we don't see evidence that this was a hack. We spoke to nearly a dozen engineers that are working within Facebook, many of them directly, to fix this. And they said that it's extremely unlikely that a hack would be able to have this kind of impact, that it would take down all these Facebook apps at the same time. What was a lot more likely, and what seems to have happened, was that it was an internal update rolled out by Facebook that just went very badly.
Okay. An internal update that went out by Facebook that just went very badly. That's the explanation that we're given here by this person who apparently has written a book about how Facebook is evil or some sort of thing. The opinion is that it was just an oopsie, an accidental little fuck-up that they ended up doing with Facebook that completely stopped every user from being able to access not just Facebook, but every other platform owned under the umbrella of Facebook. It was an accident. Okay, sure, yeah, that makes total sense. Somebody just, slipped their thumbs around when they were writing a bunch of code and completely shut down all of these websites right around the same time that a lot of people were really scrutinizing Facebook. Well, we'll listen to more about what she says. It sounds a little bit suspect so far.
And which it took them many, many hours to try and fix.
Okay, for the skeptics out there who say...
Okay, yeah, here he goes. The skeptics out there. So, I'm skeptical. I'm one of these skeptics out here. I'm skeptical that story was true at all. So, what do you think our friend here in the, what is this, probably a $1,000 suit? What do you think that his skeptical brain comes up with to ask her about how things might actually have gone?
Okay, for the skeptics out there who say, why are we even paying attention to this? Can you just remind us of the stakes here, that billions of people use these apps and they're not just teenagers sharing pictures and videos of their friends?
So his skeptics are asking, why is this important at all? That's what he thinks that skeptical people are going to be questioning about this story. Not whether or not it's true that Facebook actually went down because of an oopsie-doopsie, a slip of the finger, but that people shouldn't care about this at all. So the dichotomy here, the basic thing that's being set up is either people care about this because it's one of the most important things ever and Facebook going down could mean the loss of your job, or not caring about it at all because Facebook is just a bunch of kids posting pictures. It really seems like there's a few other aspects to this that we probably should be skeptical about right out the bat. But then, immediately, it takes an interesting turn.
Absolutely. Well, we hope they're not just teenagers sharing pictures of them and their friends, given all the reporting the Wall Street Journal did last week on the effect of Instagram on teenagers. Facebook is largely used by businesses all over the world. We have to remember that in countries ranging from Sri Lanka to Myanmar to Indonesia, Facebook is the way people do business, and WhatsApp is a way that people do business.
Ah, there it is. So again, this is reiterated what they were talking about at the beginning. This affects people, aka business. This affects business. How does this affect business? Well, it could negatively affect business because Facebook going down affects business. And remember, your Aunt Sally, or whatever the hell her name was, has that business and you don't want to destroy her business. So, obviously we can't fuck with Facebook. Facebook going down can't happen. Don't let Facebook go down. Oh my God, business. So they're basically trying to cover for, large corporations and conglomerates and allowing the complete sweeping under the rug of anything important or substantive about how this company shouldn't exist at all, or at least not have any of the power that it actually has been able to hold on to. Instead, we have to worry about Facebook going down because it could affect the little guy. And so that's manufacturing consent. 100%. And like I said, that focus on how this affects business is really all that they talk about here on the news. They don't really want to talk about the allegations or the whistleblower, though that is nice little background noise, a bit of sophistry to actually get the story to have some sort of semblance of context, but not enough context that you really know what's going on. What you do know is that this affects business and the bottom line, and we can't have that.
We spoke to shop owners all over the world today who said that their businesses were effectively shut down because people could not get to their Facebook pages and because they could not use WhatsApp to message people. We also spoke to people who couldn't reach family members, who couldn't reach elderly family members in other parts of the world because WhatsApp was down. So this is something that people use. It is practically a utility in many parts of the world and in many people's lives.
Okay, just hang on 1 second there. So she mentions that this is like a utility, but they don't really elaborate on that at all. If Facebook is like a utility, which, I think that it probably should be, just like everything else, a lot of people need Facebook to have a business or to even really get a job. A lot of employers look through your Facebook account, but we don't really treat it like a utility now, do we? It's a privately owned business, and that privately owned business has every ability to do and say and behave however they want on their platform. They can ban you, block you, stop you with any reason or no reason at all. It's not like the government can necessarily do that when it comes to water or electricity.
And as you say, that Facebook in many places is in some places a stand-in for the internet, is the vehicle by which people get onto the internet. This comes, for people who've been paying attention to this, at an incredibly inopportune moment for Facebook. We saw last night on 60 Minutes, a whistleblower came forward who you referenced, who's been arguing that Facebook has not been doing enough to tamp down on some of the, what it knows to be damaging impact that its website has on teenagers. This also comes after a year plus of scrutiny about their behavior and whether they've cracked down on hate and misinformation.
Okay, so now finally, again, after 3 minutes, 48 seconds, we get to what actually happened. We get a little bit of context here again, mostly buried by the first few minutes, and if anybody has actually uploaded a video, we know that after the second half, after the halfway point, viewership usually drops right off, or it steadily decreases. So most of the people that tuned into this broadcast are no longer with us. They've already clicked onto something else. So it's just, interesting how they bury it like that.
Information that you reported in your book, and then hearing coming tomorrow on Capitol Hill. I mean, they are in the crosshairs as much as possible on the very day that their website goes down.
You couldn't really think of worse timing as far as Facebook is concerned.
And that's her explanation for this. So it was just bad timing. The oopsie doopsie just happened to coincide with a bunch of bad timing.
For people to be going to Google and Twitter and putting in there what is wrong with Facebook or what is the problem with Facebook, because they're going to come back with hundreds of articles that were written in the last week pointing to really deep systemic problems within Facebook. You just touched on many of those in your question. The ways in which Instagram is bad for teenagers, the way in which Facebook as a platform has promoted hate speech and misinformation. These are things that journalists have been writing about for years, and as you noted, which we covered in our book, which came out this summer. But we now have a whistleblower who's come forward with internal documents showing that Facebook was sitting on research showing just how bad the platform was, just how many harms the platform was causing. And despite that research, they continued to make decisions which amplified hate speech, which increased the amount of misinformation people saw, and which marketed their product towards teenagers, which we know are incredibly sensitive to the harms of Instagram.
So that's interesting. I applaud this person for bringing up a lot of the problems that are going on with Facebook. And it is important because Facebook is a horrible, horrible platform, probably on par with or worse than Twitter. And I never say that anything is worse than Twitter, so please don't take that very lightly. So to me, this sounds a lot like circular logic. They're basically saying that Facebook doesn't have any incentive at all to shut their servers down, because if they shut their servers down, then people will automatically, see that the Facebook servers are shut down, and they're going to go online and start searching, why is Facebook shut down? And when they realize why Facebook apparently is shut down, or when they see all of this negative information about Facebook, they're going to be overwhelmed and think, oh my God, Facebook is a terrible, horrible company. Essentially, creating a Streisand effect with Facebook in and of itself. The more people can't see something, the more people are going to want to see something or find out why they can't see that thing. So it's going to bring in a lot of traffic. But the thing that they reiterate here, and they talk about in a moment, is that Facebook actually is a way that a lot of people log on to the internet. Facebook is connected with a ton of different social media accounts and that sort of thing. So if Facebook is shut down, tons of people aren't even going to be able to access the internet in general. So Facebook not having a motive to shut the servers down because it would create the Streisand effect doesn't necessarily apply in every case on this, because a lot of people just won't be able to see the internet at all. But it does raise a very interesting point. Facebook, if anybody knows about the Streisand effect, Facebook would know about it, right? Facebook is an online multinational media conglomerate corporation that's based on the internet, and the Streisand effect is basically one of the rules of the internet. It's an axiom, if you will, of online media behavior. So knowing this, then it really raises the question, why would this happen? Obviously, it sounds very suspect, and I'm, skeptical that this was an oopsie-doopsie, just a slip of some keys. So then, really, why would this be a thing? If it happened, it would have had to have happened internally because, Facebook's servers are all across the entire world and they have tons of measures in place so that things like this don't happen. So then it would have had to have happened internally, specifically in the way that it happened. So if that's the case, what was the incentive? Mark Zuckerberg apparently lost something like $4 billion or $7 billion because of this. Let's not forget that this is just a drop in the bucket of what Mark Zuckerberg actually has. Let's, do a quick search here. Yeah, so Mark Zuckerberg's net worth is $135 billion. For him to lose $7 billion is a drop in the bucket. Really not something that he would be too concerned about. I mean, obviously to us, that would be an incredible amount of money. And for him too, he wouldn't just want to lose that money unless it really mattered to him, unless it was really important what he was going to do with that. So then that, makes me wonder, what was so important that Facebook would be shut down, and all of its affiliate apps would be shut down as well. Let's not forget that WhatsApp is one of the main ways that people communicate with one another. It's overtaking text messages, and Instagram is one of the most widely used media platforms on the internet in the world. Well, this is where we really start getting mulled down in some conspiracy theories that I'm not sure if I want to stand 100% behind, but it is fun to speculate, so let's do a little bit of that. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that Facebook was in direct competition with a lot of other multinational major conglomerate corporations that deal with media. Say like Viacom or Fox or Disney or any other old school corporation that used to dominate the position that Facebook now holds. And let's say, for the sake of argument, that Facebook was facing a lot of allegations and possibly rumors of them being not just shut down, but broken apart. Antitrust laws, destroying the monopoly and turning Facebook into a bunch of smaller corporations. Now, they hinted at this exact thing in a couple of the videos, but they didn't touch on it very strongly. They quickly moved the goalpost to Facebook possibly having regulators come in and tell them what to do, which is something that they even admit that Facebook wouldn't mind happening. I mean, given the choice between Facebook being broken up and destroyed in, Mark Zuckerberg's mind, or, taken away from him, it could just have some regulations that could be tweaked around the edges and, softened a bit through financial donations to politicians and that sort of thing. Make things a little bit easier for Facebook. But of course, those old school media corporations are in the wings. They're in the background with a lot of money themselves, and they could easily be paying those same politicians to push through regulations and legislations that actually break up this social media giant. So then, you have to ask yourself, what would you do if you were in the shoes of Mark Zuckerberg? What would be some way that you could show the world that Facebook shouldn't be fucked with, and that breaking it apart or getting rid of it entirely could be bad, not just for those people that are trying to play Farmville, but for the entire U.S. economy and, in part, the global economic structure? Well, shutting down Facebook for a few hours certainly showed that a lot of people would lose their jobs and the entire economy would start to see a major crash. And if the economy crashes because of one corporation, that can't actually happen in the United States, at least not since 2008. You see, back in 2008, there was a bit of a precedent set when it came to a lot of the large corporations that were suffering from bankruptcy. A lot of the big banks and GM kind of showed the world that if they went under, they would tank the entire economy along with them. So they convinced Congress that they were too big to fail. It took an economic recession, billions of dollars lost, uncountable amounts of lives and careers and livelihoods completely decimated. But at the end of the day, a lot of those large corporations got to keep their positions and nothing of substance really happened to them. Sure, a few regulations here and there, but nothing that they couldn't have easily handled. Now let's take Facebook, one of the largest, if not the largest, media platform on the face of the earth. Something with so many fingers and so many pies that global economic stability can easily be shaken just by a few hours of people not being able to access the domain. Now, obviously, this is complete conspiracy and has no grounding in reality. It's just something that, came out of my riddled brain, my insanity-riddled brain. But it is interesting. I think that I actually seen one more video that I want to check out that came out 2 hours ago. Yes, here we go. So we're going to jump into this. This one is from Fox News. I haven't seen this one, so we'll cue this up and we'll see what Greg Gutfeld has to say here on Fox News. The Five discusses Facebook whistleblower exposing dangers of big tech.
Facebook, the company experiencing massive worldwide outages across its platforms, as a Facebook whistleblower who gave the Wall Street Journal a trove of documents exposing how toxic the tech company is now going public. Troves.
The thing I saw at Facebook over and over again was there were conflicts of interest between what was good for the public and what was good for Facebook. And Facebook over and over again chose to optimize for its own interests, like making more money. The version of Facebook that exists today is tearing our societies apart and causing ethnic violence around the world. It chooses profit over safety. It is subsidizing, it is paying for its profits with our safety.
So I just want to point out right out of the gate here, Fox News is taking a very different stance, at least a much harder stance against Facebook. Again, they are a competitor of Facebook. Fox News is owned by, Fox, which is, what is it? It's owned by News Corp, and News Corp is another one of these giant old school entities that are in direct competition with Facebook. So here we're seeing right up front, they're directly attacking Facebook. And I will admit, after watching several different videos about this at this point, it's refreshing to actually see some media outlets actually showing the allegations against Facebook right up front. But, of course, this is bittersweet because it's coming from Fox fucking News. How depressing.
Facebook is trying to push back on the claims, saying the site reflects the good, the bad, and ugly of humanity. That should be a movie. Jesse, I
I just got to say, Greg Gutfeld is not a funny person at all, and he shouldn't be listed as a comedian, more like just a very boring man with very old, stupid jokes.
Will say that the outages were a distraction from the whistleblower, and I stand by that.
What were these outages? Did we lose Facebook?
Yes.
Where have you been all day?
I didn't even know about
and
that.
Instagram and WhatsApp.
You know what? I'm not hooked on the screens like some people,
Okay.
Dana. I live my life. I read. I go to the library. I watch everyone laughing.
That's interesting. So Greg here, he kind of mentions, oh, well, Facebook could have shut down their website as a distraction so people don't go looking up all of this stuff about the whistleblower, which contradicts the person from our last interview, which was from a more liberal perspective. Here on the Fox channel, Greg is saying, oh, well, it might have been a distraction. And then our friend in the suit in the middle there, in the blue suit, the probably $10,000 suit, if I'm going to guess. I can't remember his name. I think he's the brown-haired guy that sometimes is with Steve Ducey. But he jumps in and will... He basically gives the argument that we had in the last video, from the perspective of, well, I don't really give a crap about any of this. Why should I care? So, yeah, that's wonderful. So it almost is like these two completely unaffiliated networks are offering two similar yet opposing positions.
Don't go to the library.
No.
That's clear because no one does.
Here's what I thought when I saw this. This woman comes out and says, Facebook is tearing societies apart and is causing ethnic violence around the world. Okay. Last century, what did we have? The Russian Civil War, World War I, World War II, multiple ethnic cleansings all over almost every continent. There was no Facebook then. We're going to now blame Facebook for, 2021, not as deadly as most of these in terms of conflict.
This is so pathetic. Well, I mean, what's going on today isn't like World War II and the Holocaust or slavery, so therefore it's not bad at all, and we should just keep going on with business as usual. It's fine. Who cares? That's an absolute brain-dead opinion.
In Civil War as the last century. And then we're getting torn apart here. I don't know, Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, anti-war protests. 2021, we sit on our couches and we complain. That's as tough as it gets now. I wouldn't all of a sudden say Facebook is the root of all evil. The real root of all evil is people...
The culture war. I'm gonna just assume it's gonna be something to do with the culture war.
Like CBS News executives who then point the finger at Facebook while it's them, the legacy media, that's actually tearing this country apart. All Facebook is doing is letting people interact and talk about all these evil things the regular media is doing, like suppressing news, putting out fake news, racial hoaxes, all that kind of stuff. Those are the real villains.
Oh, well, that take was completely all over the place. It kind of dealt a little bit with the culture war, but somehow at the same time they're blaming Facebook while not blaming Facebook, or, saying that Facebook is fine even though it stokes racial prejudice and misinformation and false news, fake news, and this, that, and the other thing. But Facebook is probably okay, but it's the legacy media, which isn't us, by the way, the legacy media like NBC or CNN or whatever, that's actually the problem. So we have to, take down legacy media, not us, legacy media, and also Facebook is, terrible. I'm baffled at the mental gymnastics that he had to go through to come up with such an incoherent, ramble of a take. Another common talking point is that, Fox News, being one of the largest, I believe the most watched news network, isn't that something that they tout? And they're saying, oh, well, the mainstream media is lying to you and they're all wrong. And people are like, yeah, you're right. Oh, the mainstream media is lying to us. And then they don't realize, holy fuck, Fox is the most mainstream media news network on the fucking planet. But yeah, let's just keep going on here, and we don't have much left, so let's just move on.
That was a pretty impressive defense of Facebook, and we should let everybody know that you're on their board. But
there's an opening.
You've actually changed the way I think about this in a way. Harold, I have a theory too that tech is always has a head start on humanity. So we build these things, and then we start using it, and then we don't know the effect it has on us until many years pass. And I think you could look at that at the highways and now the superhighways.
So if you think about what this was about here.
I mean, that was a mildly interesting point, I guess. Facebook creates a ton of actual problems in real life, though, and, them shutting down or being shut down, as far as I'm concerned, is kind of a net good.
Notwithstanding what Jesse said, they have internal documents that have been turned over, this whistleblower did, that showed that Facebook is aware of how some of their content is not altogether positive and healthy, and that it is addictive, particularly to young women. As a father of a 7-year-old who does not engage in who does not mess with social media, is on social media, and you think about some of the other things in this memo that said that they were aware that these young women were so conscious of how they looked, and it might have impacted them negatively, but they didn't change any of their algorithms. Now, I don't disagree with you about whom all should be blamed. All the blame should be put on Facebook. But if you can't regulate yourself as a company, like as big as this company is, one of the 5 biggest companies in the country, then Congress is going to do it for you. Zuckerberg and his team are going to have to come before the House and the Senate. This is about Marsha Blackburn and a Democratic senator whose name is escaping me at the moment.
I can picture him.
Who generally don't work together. They've come together saying we're going to, maybe Blumenthal. They've come together and say, you know what, we are going to call Facebook and Twitter and others in to tell us what other internal documents do you guys have that shows that what you're doing is harmful to young women and children. Now, the reason this came out is because they're trying to develop another set of products for children. And people...
Right, yeah. So, yeah, and this is your typical conservative talking point. The new media, whatever new form of media there is, it's bad, it's poisoning the minds of the youth. It's going to lead to addiction and violence and so forth and so on. We've heard this talking point a million times before. When it comes to music or, any kind of subversive movie, video games, everything. Conservatives always just go back to that, and they also hide behind the flag and the children and say, we're doing it for the children, we need to save the kids. But that isn't to say, like I said before, that Facebook isn't addictive, because it certainly is. All social media is meant to be addictive, and, so are 24-hour news networks and all of these other things. So... and the 24-hour news networks, like Fox, are in competition with companies like Facebook. So, maybe it's advantageous for Fox to throw in a couple of digs at Facebook and make them look a little bit bad, because them falling to pieces might mean that Fox News and News Corp and all of these other old school media outlets might regain a little bit of control of what they had once lost. But you'll notice that, again, they don't really focus at all on the idea of breaking up Facebook because it's a monopoly that controls large portions of the media. They don't touch on that part because, well, so is News Corp, and so is Disney, and so are all of these other massive conglomerate corporations that control everything you see and hear. And if a precedence is set that some of these corporations, these not monopolies, but oligopolies, many owners instead of just one single owner, that these oligopolies get broken into smaller pieces, then that might be bad for the bottom line. I don't really see how it would be good for investors. Anyway, that's basically what I wanted to talk about. This is still a developing story, so I'm sure a lot of other information is going to come out about it, and I didn't really want to talk a whole lot about the specifics. All I wanted to do is just show a couple of examples of how the media immediately jumped in and started to try to spin this in a way that deflected the attention away from Facebook and focused it on how this is going to negatively affect business. And I like that little cap at the end with the five discussing all of this stuff on Fox News, where you get a little bit of the other perspective from the conservative perspective, where they use this again to fear bait and fearmonger, and essentially, divide family members from their kids, or say that, make them believe that they're protecting their children, while at the same time saying that the things that their children are interested in or focused on is bullshit. So, or completely not worth anybody's time. Thought that was interesting. Hope you did too. If you do get a chance, check out all the links in the description box below. And as always, keep evolving.